Well, more than 4 million people in South Sudan are at risk of famine by the end of 2014 if fighting in the country does not end soon. U.S. officials say clashes between rebels and government forces have wrecked food markets and forced people to abandon livestock and land. Farmers should be planting their crops right now, but many who escaped fighting at home say it is still not safe to return. More than 1.3 million people have been displaced. UN officials say they need $1.8 billion in aid. Now, celebrations that marked the birth of the world's youngest nation were short-lived. The conflict between President Salva Kiir's government and the opposition, led by his former deputy, Riek Machar, has prompted a humanitarian crisis and deaths of hundreds of civilians. Now, some are wondering if the Sudan-South Sudan divorce happened rather too soon. For more perspective, I'm joined by James Copnell, author of A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, Sudan and South Sudan's Bitter and Incomplete Divorce. Mr. Copnell, welcome to Africa 54.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, you did spend quite some time in Sudan, yeah? First, just give us a sense of the background to the title of the book.
A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, yes. It's a quote actually from Omar al-Bashir's uncle, the Sudanese president's uncle, and he described the South Sudanese as a poisonous thorn in the hearts of Sudan. Now, that's not something a lot of Sudanese people would agree with, but I chose that title because it reflected a reality in the period after separation, after the 2011 split, when both countries tried essentially to antagonize the other, or at least the political leaderships did. So you had both countries were sponsoring rebel groups in the other country. There was economic warfare, largely around oil, and even direct clashes on the disputed border. It was a difficult first couple of years after separation for both countries, and it showed how both countries were still intertwined despite the separation.
Would you say that from a person who spent some time there, the time was really ripe for this separation, to have countries that can function separately?
I would say yes. Look, there had been two very long north-south civil wars within Sudan in which millions of people had died. And the bottom line is 99% of South Sudanese voted for separation. The South Sudanese people wanted an independent country, and that's absolutely their right, and I think therefore it was the right decision. Now, this young country, South Sudan, has immense challenges, really, really difficult challenges. At independence, it was underdeveloped, it had faced the ravages of war for such a long period of time. It had also, of course, its generation of leaders were rebel leaders, people more used to fighting in the bush than running a country, and there have been political quarrels, and that's led to the terrible situation we see now.
Now, some would say, isn't that a basis for an argument that perhaps it wasn't time, that some of those who were going to take leadership hadn't even really gotten to a point where they can run a country? And also there's the other question of some things hadn't been clearly agreed upon on how to separate the spoils of the separation.
Well, look, let's take that one by one. Were the South Sudanese ready? Put it this way, in the 50 years or so since Sudan became independent in 1956 from the colonial powers, the South Sudanese had largely known warfare and underdevelopment and bad governance from Khartoum. Why should they not have their own go at running their own country? It's not as if the governance they'd had from Khartoum was any better. Now, should things have been agreed before? Undoubtedly. So what happened in the first couple of years after separation was disputes between Khartoum and Juba over oil, over the borders, over disputed regions like Abyei. And this led to huge problems for both countries because of economic interdependence of the two states, because of the way the people still live together. So in the book, A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, I talk also about a South Sudanese doctor, Garang, who fell in love with a Northern Sudanese. They got married, they had children. And then when the separation came, he was in South Sudan, she was in Sudan with the children, and they needed visas to see the members of their family. Those ties are still there, but it could have been sorted out better before independence, but that doesn't mean the South Sudanese shouldn't have the country they dreamed of.
Now, very quickly, many people get a little suspicious of a Westerner writing a book or even reporting on Africa. There's always been, there have been these perceptions that there's always an agenda if there's some guy from the West. What would you say in your defense?
Well, I challenge people to read the book and see to what extent those criticisms could be true. My concern in this book was to reflect the voices of Sudanese and South Sudanese politicians, but also ordinary peoples. I profile cowherders and women who sell tea on the streets of Khartoum, and people who live in very remote places, and religious leaders, people from all parts of Sudanese and South Sudanese society, in an attempt to bring their voice to readers in Sudan, in South Sudan, throughout Africa and the world.
Well, it looks like there's quite a lot to know and to learn about Sudan and South Sudan. Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Copnell.
Thank you.
Mr. James Copnell is the author of A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, Sudan and South Sudan's Bitter and Incomplete Divorce. Thanks for joining us.